I think in the interest of time, why don't we go ahead and get started, and we'll hope that people get the message to get to the right place and join us. I really appreciate your attendance. I see a familiar name in the room and certainly one familiar face. I'm happy to also see the rest of you here. Hey, Meg. So I'm going to be sharing a story about a unique instance of what I term hospitality that arose in work that I carried as a ministry for 38 years. I was a manager, project manager, and then eventually a corporate manager in the commercial construction industry. There will be a few slides at the outset to kind of ground the story because it happened in a very specific context 30 years ago. And then after, we'll get together in the room afterwards and I'll tell the story. We'll talk about some questions as the story progresses. So let me unshare. I'm sorry, I meant to unshare. I didn't. Now we're just going to go to slide 2. How about that? Okay, I had forwarded this poem. Would anybody be open to just reading this briefly?
Sure, I'll read it.
Thanks, Meg.
Okay, let me get my screen closer here. Outwitted, he drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Edwin Markham, The Shoes of Happiness and Other Poems, 1913.
This is sort of a touchstone of mine that came from my Unitarian days when this was on our order of service bulletin cover. And I think it's a good frame for what I'm about to share. What does it mean to be hospitable or to extend hospitality, to be drawing a bigger circle? When we think about our daily lives, we're presented with situations where we're asked to be open-hearted, welcoming, curious, and seek common ground with people that we don't necessarily agree with or hold the same values and ideals with. And that extends from our families to our communities, to our worship communities. Everybody experiences this on a daily basis. So this story that I'm going to share, as I said, it's happened 30 years ago. For me, it's an example of hospitality around differing core beliefs about what the work world should look like in a very particular context, and the way that apparently opposing ideals were brought back into a place of fruitful action by a very unique intervention. I find myself coming back to the story again and again as I get into situations where I'm at odds with other people. And I'd also advanced these questions ahead on the email the other night. How do we define hospitality? In this story, what form or forms does the hospitality take? Made the first move or moves? Where were the potential or actual roadblocks to that hospitality? Do you spy any ground or new ground for understanding that rose from this encounter? How might this have unfolded differently? And finally, if you were there, how might you have responded or reacted? And I'd invite you, I carry these questions with me when I get into these sticky situations because they help me to find my way through. So here's the context. I was the project manager for a 55-story office building in Chicago. What my company was doing is this stuff on the outside of the building. It's called the building skin or the building enclosure system. We designed, we manufactured, we procured, we put it all together, we shipped it to the job site, all assembled so that it goes together like Legos. You put a unit in and everything's done and the building's dried in and it's structurally sound and everything's happy and hunky-dory. The construction industry, particularly on the commercial side, is a really rough and tumble business. And this was 1991. So 30 years ago, I was kind of an unusual character. There were not very many women doing what I did. it would take years of building like this online. So you had to work in close contact with people that you didn't necessarily see eye to eye with about your contract, but also about your right to be there. So this is what I was dealing with. And to pull a building like this off, it's like choreography on a very small stage, very complex choreography. There were probably 40 trades involved in this job. The job itself, being in Chicago, was a completely unionized job. So all of the contractors working on it had to hire union labor. The site it filled the city block. So we had very tight areas where we could access to hoist materials and that kind of thing. There were, again, 40 different contractors that were trying to access these loading areas. And if you had an area rented and you didn't have your truck show up, you were in big trouble. And this is what happened one day. So the other constraint on the project is that the city had set in the late 80s pretty stringent minority and women business enterprise and minority and women participation in labor work goals in the jobs of 25% minority and 5% women in business. This was not an easy thing for a company like mine to achieve. So, but there was one little window where we could buy some services, and that was hoisting the crated materials like this to this lower part of the building, because the apparatus we were using at the upper part of the building was not available to us for the first 10 floors. So we had to hire a motor crane, and that's what we did. There was a woman-owned business that had a motor crane. And if you don't know what a motor crane is, that's what a motor crane is. I'm sure you've seen them before. Let me just scroll down here. So there were 3 people to this incident. There was myself, who I was 31 at the time. I'd been project managing for about 10 years. I was very competent, and I was gaining respect in the Chicago market. I had 8 years of experience with high-rise buildings, and I was also very tied into I'm going to create opportunities for women in this business. I'm a feminist before the word became more toxic than it needed to be. I was also management. I was one of those people that earned a salary. I was not a union person, but I employed union labor. I had this wonderful superintendent named Tommy, who was in his late 50s. He'd been an iron worker for 35 years. He was very well respected in the local union that supplied the finish workers that we used. And he had some pretty definite ideas about gender roles at home and in the workplace. And he represents sort of the labor aspect of this. It's a cultural difference in, labor and management. And then finally, here's Donna, our crane supplier. She's in her 30s. It's a brand new firm. It's been around for a couple of years. She was hired to hoist the materials to the lower floors, and she is a service contractor. She is under our employ, but we have no control over her people. So I'm going to stop the share for a minute and just tell the story. So Donna's crane service had been in business for about 2 years. They organized when the goals, the minority and women's goals were really getting organized in Chicago. When that happened, she and her husband, who happened to be a journeyman equipment operator, they looked at each other and said, "Hey, Donna, you know a whole lot about the construction business. You've been, working on job sites in the, sort of clerical end of managing things." And so she knew her way around, and he knew how to run equipment. So they took a second mortgage on their house. They bought a crane and went into business for themselves and started pursuing work. We were one of the first people that were willing to use them in the downtown market. So one Thursday afternoon, Tommy had arranged for 3 trucks to show up to be unloaded to the 8th floor. 1 o'clock was our appointment with the crane. 1 o'clock came and went. The crane didn't show up. Our 3 trucks are sitting there on Clark Street waiting to be unloaded. This was the first and only time that Donna had let us down, that her firm had let us down. I happened to be on site that day, and by 20 after 1, Tommy's fit to be tied. I wasn't happy because I'm sitting there looking at 3 trucks that have to be sent back to the south side of town, and I have to pay extra for that. I had interrupted the whole flow of material deliveries to the job site for the afternoon, so I was going to hear about it from the contractor we worked for, the construction manager. I was going to have to dip into my contingency funds and, pay for all this extra time that all these people are standing around waiting to unload a truck. They haven't got to unload. And I was going to have to try to negotiate with Donna to see if she would participate in some of these costs because she had caused the problem. Well, Tommy wasn't a very happy superintendent because and it went deeper than just the events. The city's requirement for minority and women sat really hard with the local unions. They were very nepotistic about how they their apprenticeships when they came open. And, lots of times guys' sons or cousins or, nephews or whatever would get the jobs. These were very high paying jobs, even at the outset. In 1991, an apprentice ironworker started at $18 an hour. And the guys like Tommy that were working for me were making $35 and $40 an hour. So it messed with their nepotism. It also messed with their ability to call up and say, hey, I want you to send me Joe and Sam, because we needed 25% minorities and 5% women. So not only were those people not available, they were the most popular people in the hall because, there was this requirement. So Tommy is not happy. His union's not happy. The local government has kind of got its nose up in the union's business, and everybody's unhappy about that. It also interfered with Tom's ability to get a crane from a guy that he'd worked with for 30 years. So he wasn't happy about this. So what do you think's going to happen? We're standing there with no trucks, or with trucks but no crane. Tommy turns around, starts waving his arms, races up in front of me and starts yelling. I don't remember everything he said, but I do remember 2 particular phrases: his deep regard for women and their coffee clutches, and that we were messing up a perfectly good system. And if we weren't in the middle of this, then everything would be just fine and he could get his job done. I was really accustomed to his short fuse. I knew about his attitudes. I'd been around it quite a while. He had a type A personality. I got that. But when I heard the words coffee clutches, my ears shut down and my blood pressure went up. So I do not remember what I said to him, but I did make it clear that we needed to talk about this, but we weren't going to do it right then in front of all the men. And, I went stomping back to my office, and all the way I'm thinking about it, doggone it, I've been working so hard to make a mark in this industry and things are beginning to change. And, this guy's just messing up my happy time. So I get back to the office and I call Donna. And she's already heard from Tommy, but now she's hearing it from me. She explained to me that she and her husband had gotten their wires crossed, that he had programmed to have that crane on one site all day long and didn't know he was supposed to break down and come to us in the afternoon. That's all that had happened. And that happens sometimes. People just don't get the message. Like today, you guys didn't necessarily get the right link to use. So I shared with her what had happened with Tommy. And without missing a beat, she says, let me come talk to him. This is my problem, not yours. I know how to get this straightened out. And I'm thinking, great, my savior here. So we arranged to meet at 10 the next morning. And I got off the phone and I continued to kind of stew about the thing all night. But I got up the next morning and I went to my office. And then 10 o'clock, I go on up to the job site, which is 8 blocks away. Donna shows up about 5 minutes after I do. And we have this little wooden shanty built on the 4th floor that we use as a job site office. So I've been there a couple minutes. In she walks in black stiletto heels on a construction site. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? She takes off her coat to reveal that she's wearing a low-cut, skin-tight leopard print dress. And I'm sitting there with my jaw on the floor. I'm thinking, you don't play the sex card in this kind of a situation. You don't do this in this milieu. I mean, how do you keep your respect? How do you get these guys to listen to you? So I'm not saying a word. I'm too busy just trying to keep my mouth from hitting the table. Tommy, who considered himself a gentleman and was really just he was always polite and kind of paternalistic around women, kind of common to his age and his working environment. He welcomed her graciously, but it was clear she had about 360 degrees of his attention that day. And then she proceeded to do probably one of the most masterful presentations of a business plan and an approach to gaining his trust that I have ever seen in my entire life. I was just sitting there going, I don't happening in front of me. She described their humble beginnings as a partnership between her and her husband and how they'd worked so hard. They'd mortgaged their house and they bought this crane and then they were able to buy another one and they were working on getting more operators so that they could expand. And they were going to grow into this big business. And I'm going to tell you, 30 years on, that woman owns one of the largest heavy equipment groups in the city of Chicago. She's sitting there in her leopard print low-cut dress doing this. And I don't know, I was just kind of taken back by the whole thing. Tommy was completely won over. After 10 minutes, he is ready to give her all the business that she wants. And it wasn't just the dress. So she puts her coat back on. She strides out of the office. I mean, I would have given her a medal for that performance. I don't know whether that's something she had done before in another situation. I have no idea what the genesis of that was, but it was brilliant. So we have our problem solved, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what happened. And it hit me. She had disarmed both of us. She had kind of taken us both out of our ingrained expectations about what we were there doing and brought us back into the room to work on the job in front of us. And that was to have a successful project, get it done on budget, on time, meet the goals that the city had set, all of those things. And so after 30 years, I still go back to that startling action on Donna's part when I'm kind of stuck in my own stuff and think, okay, what am I looking at? What am I missing here? How can I get back to the common ground that I have with this other person? Because we always have common ground. Neither Tommy or I had to give up our core beliefs about our jobs, about who we were. We didn't have to cede power to the other. The whole gender politics things really didn't shift in any particular way. But Donna caused us to focus on common ground and she understood how deeply invested we both were in the success of this project. So let's see. I think I'd like to put those questions back up again. So if you'll bear with me. Here we go. So if I haven't tipped my hand completely, where do you guys see hospitality at work in this story? Or do you?
Hi.
Kimberly?
I tried to define it, and so I wrote hospitality is the art of inclusion, and so where I see hospitality is, I guess with Donna, she was including you both back into the project.
I would agree. I actually go a little further back. And of course, I know the story and I lived it, so I get to cheat a little bit here. But Tommy and I had already shown hospitality to one another simply by not refusing to work with one another. When Tommy was brought on by my company, it took a little bit of talking to get him comfortable with working with a young female project manager. And he had ceded and agreed to do that. And up until this incident, we had gotten along fairly well. We had gotten our jobs done. And likewise, I understood who he was and where he came from. And if he said something a little off color, I wasn't going to call him on that. You know, you pick your battles. So, but you're correct. That's what I think happened. Donna just came in and really grabbed both of us where we were. And in a certain way, she was poking us both in the eyes a little bit about how silly we were being.
It also sounds like the hospitality evolved and it grew. So maybe initially people started off not knowing each other, but then by working together, you ended up knowing more and more.
Absolutely. Yeah. By the time we were at that point in that project, we had been on the site for about 3 months. It takes a lot of prep work before you can even start, putting in those kinds of systems. And Tommy and I had had opportunities to work together and have meetings and go to meetings. And yes, we had, it was the familiarity that we were building. I could have very easily let this situation stay a burr under my saddle, and he could have too, but we didn't. I mean, maybe that's going a little further ahead in the story, but
I also was wondering about welcoming in, like you already kind of said it, but I think of hospitality mainly with like welcoming in people, but also welcoming in ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so her outfit was something that was excluded, but then all of a sudden it's in there. I don't know. Wild.
Yeah, I never talked to Donna about this afterwards, and I regret this all these years later. I would love to go back and just ask her about that. Maybe I should, but it was the thing that was the hook for both of us. It kind of made me stop and think, what kind of prejudices am I carrying about her clothing when she's obviously incredibly competent? That was my experience up to that point, and she continued that right forward. And yet for Tommy, it was, I'll put it this way. I had a biology teacher when I was a freshman in high school that when he would start losing the class's attention, he would do this and continue lecturing with a pencil hanging. Ninth graders are like, what's he doing? He had our attention. And that's exactly what Donna was doing with that dress. She had Tommy's attention. And it was in a way that she wasn't like going, you have to listen to me. She's kind of inviting him to pay attention to her. And then she just rips off this brilliant summary of what they're about. So, yeah.
Was the idea that you had held is, you said it, I think, but that the idea is like, it's unacceptable to use your sexuality. It's unacceptable for a woman to use her sexuality to invite someone into common ground. I mean, that's just an assumption that I have, but that was being challenged, right?
It absolutely was. Yeah. And, as I look back on it 30 years forward, had I been in the situation and had I been Donna, I would have never chosen to do that because that's just who I am. That was uncomfortable to me. I'm not sure I could have pulled it off like she did either, but, that's sort of a personal thing that I always kind of tried to stay above. And I will say that, having been 10 years in the construction industry by that point in time, I had been inappropriately touched. I had been told by men that you shouldn't be here. You're taking a job away from a man. I had been told by project managers. In fact, I had one building owner that refused to recognize me in meetings. So I had to take someone else with me to do the talking. But at least the company had me in those meetings. I mean, it was really not a cool situation. So, I just never wanted to do something that I felt might put me in the wrong light with any of those guys. Donna's situation was different. She was not working for Tommy. She was a contractor to us, and she had her own business interest. And so, she was sort of taking care of her own backyard, but her backyard certainly bordered on ours, and she was important to our being able to grow the right grass. So, yeah, I mean, she was in a little different situation. Maybe it was easier for her to quote unquote get away with something like that. But for me, I could never have done that. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a place to gently flirt. I don't know. We all have to make our choices about how we present ourselves in order to kind of achieve what it is we're trying to achieve. Any of those other questions, do any of them jump out to you? I mean, I can think of 10 ways it could have unfolded differently, and not all of them would have, ended up in a successful resolution. Would you have handled that differently? Is there something you might have done differently in the situation, given what you know?
I mean, I'm wondering what would have happened if you sort of disaggregate the components of what she did. If she hadn't worn such provocative clothing, and yet had still, because it sounds to me like she was appealing to a common class background with him. And an element of that indeed might explain the clothing. That she was signaling social class as much as, sexual availability or whatever. So, telling the story about humble origins and all that seems really masterful. And it doesn't sound like it was untrue either. So, it was also authentic.
Yeah, Meg, as you're talking, I was just thinking the piece that some remember, and I'm remembering again, is the fact that she was married to a man who was functionally Tommy's equal. He, in a different union, he was a journeyman heavy equipment operator. He'd gone through the 4 years of apprenticeship, and he had been working in the industry, and he too had a reputation. And being married being a partnership of marriage with someone who is working in the trades is a different thing than being, many other things, being married in any kind of a relationship with other people in different groups. So I think there was also, the clothing sort of signified a unity with that group of people who, they made their livings and did good jobs in the union, sort of the union. I'm looking for a good word, but that was a way of looking at things. And that was why I did set that up as, here I am, management. He was labor, he was union, and her husband was union. So there was some commonality there. So, yeah. Well, there's a postscript to this story I'd like to share, and it happened a couple weeks later. But I guess before I do that, does anybody have any questions or comments or anything they'd like to contribute? Kathy?
I just had a couple of thoughts. So first, thank you for sharing the story. First thought is, so often I think how women dress is very much scrutinized. And obviously we don't know what the intent was without, like you said, you're curious to ask. One thought is also that I think her name's Donna, was expressing hospitality by not feeling like she had to conform to what a woman is supposed to look like in a traditional man's environment. And this is who I'm showing up with as, this is how I dress. And I invite you all to be with me. So not with a thought of I'm dressing provocatively or I'm trying to kind of signal anything at all. And then the second piece is the hospitality of maybe all joining together and having more meetings to continue the relationship further.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is we had the missed delivery was at the 8th floor. We only had 3 more floors before we didn't need them anymore.
Got it. Oh, well.
It was like, darn. But I do know that on subsequent projects, Tommy and his guys continued to use Donna's service. So, she built a bridge there with him that effectively set the other buddy-buddy relationships that he'd had for 30 years aside. So, yeah, there was 2 weeks later, after we had that day and we had that meeting, I went back to my office. It's like, well, problem solved. Tommy and I were a little tender around each other. We were never going to joke about this. And we were just sort of not really circling each other, but we were a little bit wary around one another. So 2 weeks later, I happened to walk into the shanty and Tommy was in the middle of training this little bitty female iron worker who happened to be named Tammy. We called her Tammy too, to install a set of seals. It involved moving a big block of aluminum into place, running some screws, and then putting 2 sealants in very specific places and tooling them in very specific ways. If she didn't get this right, or her crew, every single time, we were in trouble, because if water got past a certain point in that exterior barrier and got into this gutter, and that gutter was not exactly perfectly sealed, there was no way to get to it. And so you start having to do structural surgery on a very high dollar wall system. And it's not pretty. So he was training her to do this seal. And I walked in, and since he was in the middle of that, I sat down to do some paperwork, but I'm kind of listening. And he did like the most amazing job of taking her through this 3 or 4 times and just asking her to describe what she needed to do. He had built a little model, and, so she was going through it again and again and again. Here's where I have to put this sealant and run this screw. And he got done. And I mean, it was so evident that he cared about the project. Not only did he care, but he made sure she cared. And he didn't just tell her, you have to do it like this. He said, you have to do it like this because of this and this and this. And so when you understand why you're doing something, it's more clear to you, what you're doing. So as Tammy too was leaving, I let her know that she had the most important job on this project. And she was still just a second-year apprentice. Her eyes got really big. And I said, no, I'm not kidding you. This is where we can just lose control of all kinds of things structurally, but even more importantly, water infiltration, because that's one of the ways that buildings get damaged the most. Things don't usually fly off of buildings, but you get water in there and you've got all kinds of damage, and it can last a long time if you can't figure it out. So, she got the message. And then I turned to Tommy while she was standing there, and I just said, I have never seen anybody do that so well. And I'm just so glad I got to see that and to understand just how much you care about this job. Well, his face just kind of relaxed, and his shoulders relaxed, and his body relaxed, and he just kind of. And from that point on, we had a marvelous relationship. And that was nothing more than me being absolutely honest with what I had witnessed. I mean, he had done a stellar job, and for something that was very, very important. So we went on to work on another project together. We never had other problems. He eventually retired because he had back problems and needed to retire. I think he retired when he was 62. He's probably not on the earth anymore. This was like I say, 30 years ago. And the other piece of that story, the postscript, is that Donna, her name is Donna Stevenson. She now owns Stevenson Crane Service, and they are one of the biggest interests in the Chicago market in providing cranes. Tommy went on to, he finished his career, he took his pension, and he had a nice life afterwards. And I went on to do some pretty amazing things in the construction market, moving into consulting, and I spent 38 years there, and I was very happy. Wouldn't trade a day of it, although there are some days when I was in the middle of it, I didn't think I wanted to stay there. So, but being hospitable, being open to understanding that whatever's important, I'll use I language. What's important to me may not be important to you, but there are going to be things that are important to us together in a situation, and trying to keep focused on that. That's to me where hospitality functions. And whether that's a work situation or, some discussion between theologies or methodologies or, I don't know, angels dancing on heads of pins, I don't know. That's where hospitality comes in. It's a way of holding our hearts open and holding our minds open to maybe not knowing everything, and maybe not seeing everything through the clearest lens. So that's my story, and I'm curious whether any of you, well, I'd be open to any questions again. I'd also love to hear stories that you have brought.
I think you just said it, but would you share your definition of hospitality again?
Oh boy, I bet I didn't write that down. It's having an open heart and an open mind, and understanding that my answer or my frame may not be the one that someone else holds, but there should be some places where we have some common ground. And I'll pick on Michael Burkle a little bit, or maybe not pick on him. I'll raise his name. He also would talk about hospitality in classes that I've taken from him as curiosity. If I don't understand where Meg's coming from, I can ask Meg questions, and hopefully we can get a dialogue going. Or if Kimberly and I had some argument, maybe if we take a breath and we step back and we say, what just happened there? And what's important to me? And what's important to you? And how do we bring this back into where we're both working together? But it's that open-heartedness and that understanding that, our circle, the circle I drew, I'll pick on myself again, this whole feminist thing that I had, that was a circle that I thought was pretty open, but in a way it was very, very closed. And Tommy, by allowing me into his circle of work, probably thought he was being pretty open, but he had some places where he still had his circle closed. So I don't know, Donna sort of put it in our faces that day, where we both needed to work on our, put a little elastic in the edge of that circle.
Thank you.
And I like what you said about the circles and expanding them, and also in the poem initially. Along with that, your last example is how you told the two people how they were important in the circle, which I really liked. So from Tommy from the teaching, and Tammy too from the important work she was doing for the project and why it was important. So kind of celebrating.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I built a bunch of buildings, but those are not the accomplishments that I remember. What I really remember is the involvement with people and the opportunities I had to mentor people and kind of in my own backhanded way, open the circle for other women that have come along behind me. That's where the ministry was for me. And when it quit being a ministry, that's when it didn't feel like it anymore. That's when I retired. So, and here I am in seminary. So I'm going to open the circle here. I've mentioned that I know Meg. We've been in classes together before. But Kathy and Pam and Kimberly and TM, I don't know who you are. Are you students or alums, or what is your interest in being here?
So I'm an alum
Pam?
with an MA, not MDiv, MA, just a few years ago. But I was mostly access, so I don't know if we overlapped. So the story, I'm also a Quaker. The story that I thought of to tell, a few years ago, we had somebody in our meeting, and she'd been around a long time, but she didn't come to meeting for business very often. And she didn't actually come to meeting very often. She would teach first day school with the kids or other things. And I think she was attracted to Quakers. She would, if you asked her what a Quaker was, she would say what the testimonies are. But she had no understanding of Quaker process. So I don't know how many of you are friends, but there is a way we sort of have meeting for business and committee meetings and whatnot. So anyhow, she ended up as the clerk of the first day school committee, and she had no idea how to do that. And I was clerk of the meeting at the time. So I went to one of the committee meetings. I can't remember exactly why, whether there were issues before or what, but anyhow, I went to the meeting and it was terrible. She just kept talking. She just never stopped talking the entire time. And I guess she was nervous or whatever. She talked the whole time and she wouldn't, to get input, you had to yell, stop here, listen to your food. So anyhow, after that was done, I, as clerk of the meeting, I thought I have to talk to her. I have to explain to her why this was a problem. So having taken a course from Lonnie Valentine on interreligious dialogue, I realized, so I set up a meeting and there was a third person there sort of as a neutral person. And I realized I had to go into it knowing that I needed to learn something from her, that I needed to be open to learn something from her. And because of that, I think that we were successful. I wasn't trying to say you're doing this all wrong. I mean, I was trying to say, this is why you're frustrated. This is why you're nervous. This is, and I tried to give her, instead of just saying you're doing it wrong, but say, here's a way you can do it better. But what she taught me was how important she needed more affirmation, even though I thought I was giving her a lot. She needed even more affirmation from me of what she was doing. And if I was to send her an email, I first needed to say something positive, then say the problem, and then send something positive again. And so I thought, boy, that seems awfully stilted, but I took it to heart and I tried to do that then as we were going forward. So that's my little story. Not quite as exciting as building a skyscraper in Chicago, but it's and our little meeting in Lake Forest. That's what we did.
I think it's lovely that you could both hear one another in the exchange, even though it was sort of difficult. You gave each other space to hear what the other was saying, and particularly when she requested a very specific pattern of communication. I'm thinking, wow, that's a positivity sandwich. There's a great way to sort of wrap up bad news in some good news, and hopefully, gain the cooperation or at least gain the ear. And so that's a beautiful way of resolving what could have been a much, or what could have continued to be a difficult situation. I see a chat down here that I hadn't picked up on. Brown has stepped away. There was a workshop having trouble. Okay, good. Right.
And I'm Kathy Rathke. I'm not a alumni, I'm not a student, but I am a kind of an interested party in Quaker faith and practice and spirituality. And I suppose my hospitality story is just how much hospitality I've felt as I've started attending a few meetings and felt very welcomed. My friend Stephanie Crumley Effinger was at the school, retired from the Erland School of Religion, and she was our officiant at my husband's and my wedding
Oh, lucky
33
you.
years ago. So in the back of my head, after meeting Stephanie and just feeling her inclusivity and how she was, Quakerism has always kind of been kind of teasing at the back of my head. So it's just been in the past year or so, I started to think, well, maybe I'll explore this a little. And Stephanie and I have reconnected. So I have just felt so much hospitality, and I thank everyone for that.
Are you thinking of auditing or possibly taking some coursework?
I am. I'm actually joining the next session, which is, I think, about like what courses are available and things like that for students, but
Great.
probably perhaps longer term. I've got a lot going on with work. I see someone waving in the background, sorry, who is a student I know. And you're also a student, correct?
I am, and I am an
Oh.
access student. I'm
Okay.
sitting in Avon, Connecticut, and I've been on campus. I was there for 2 weeks for one intensive, and that's it. The rest of it
all
I've done
right.
at distance. And
And
it's
Pam, also, that was your experience as well?
Yeah,
remote?
I was an access student also.
Okay.
Yeah, although I was an MA student and I had to write a thesis and I had to come back on campus to do that a lot.
Got it.
So it was a little more than that. So where are you from, Kathy?
I'm actually
Which
right
meeting
in
you're going to?
Carmel, Indiana, so I'm quite close, but really I'm thinking of maybe auditing a course on Quaker history or something like that. I'm not
Sure.
in my
Sure.
head planning to do like a full course,
Mhm.
but we'll see how things evolve.
well, I stuck my
Great.
toe in with a Quaker, the certificate in Quaker spirituality, which I finished in December, and now I'm doing the MA in Theopoetics and Writing. So
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
it's habit forming.
Very nice.
Well, we have about
I-
4 minutes by my
Oh.
clock before the next session. Kimberly, did you want to share something?
Oh, I was gonna speak, but I was wondering about TM. I didn't want to. She hasn't said anything, and so I didn't want to take that if she wants to speak. Oh, there she is.
There you are.
You're fine to speak. I'm actually learning a lot. I've never heard of this college before. And so I honestly have no idea who sent me the emails to invite me to check out this whole 3-day thing. And I didn't realize that it was all Quaker. And I love that. And so now that I know that they're like, what's an MA? Somebody explain that. Because I'm like, there are degrees. I can earn stuff. You have just given me ideas. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And Kimberly, did you have something?
Oh, I'm from Oregon, and I found this program on an internet search, and I'm looking into the Theopoetics and Writing program, and I thought this would be a good way for me to kind of feel your culture. So that's why I'm here. And I'm not a Quaker. I'm a retired Eastern Orthodox. I tried that out for 9 years and
Oh, cool.
didn't really belong there. So now I'm floating and not sure where I belong. Anyway, that's my story right now.
We have another person who is exactly like that, was Orthodox for a while, who's a student here now in the Theopoetics and Writing program. And I'm an access student from Northern California, by the way. I have all but finished the Theopoetics and Writing program, and I'm actually switching into the MDiv program. But the end result may be that I get 2 degrees because ESR has this this sort of, bargain where you can get 2 degrees. Let's see, for the degree that requires fewer credits, you can waive half the credits. So it's like a degree and a half's worth of credits gets you 2 degrees. So yes, it is habit forming.
Yeah, one of the things I've found that's been marvelous about this is it's a very tight community too. Even if you're kind of at a distance, a big distance, there's the school is so good at the inclusive feel. And I think maybe because it's been doing access for so long, it kind of had a leg up on how to do this when the pandemic hit. So that's, I mean, I just started in August of 20, I think. Yeah. So, I don't know much about what happened before, but it's glad I'm here. Is anyone planning to attend the information session? Because you get
I
about.
am. I'm going to need to jump off. So thank you all so much. This was really enjoyable.
Thank you. I'm so glad you were here.
Yeah. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Nice to meet you all.
That's very
Nice to
interesting.
meet everyone.
Okay, good luck, Tam. I hope you come. Yeah, sorry.
All right. Well, we can hang out or we can go, whichever everybody is up to.
I got
You got to skedaddle.
something else I got to do.
Go for
Okay,
it.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later this weekend.
Oh, I forgot to tell the person who knows Stephanie that she was here during worship. So she's at the workshop or the gathering. They might know that already. So because I just saw her in worship.
Oh, well, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm
You're married.
I couldn't pass up the opportunity to get one more hit of